Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Hello, good morning ladies and gentlemen. My name is Rizky Maulana Azhari. I'm a student of the English Department at Faculty of Humanities in Universitas Komputer Indonesia. Thank you for having me. Today I'm going to talk about Middle English. The highlight of my presentation will be medieval literature, mostly to share some perspective on how the situation at that time and the situation of the development of literature in that era. Therefore, I really hope that in the next 8 minutes, I will be able to finish the presentation. The outline of my presentation will be first, I will frame the medieval period in general. After that, I will talk about the century and stories from each century. So let's start with the first one. The medieval period runs from the end of late antiquity in the 4th century to English Renaissance of the late 15th century. Next. The early portion of medieval period in England is dominated by Anglo-Saxons, whose language is incomprehensible to today's speaker of English. The early portion is known as the Old English period. The Old English period came to end with the Norman invasion of 1066. Normans spoke a dialect of French later called Anglo-Norman. Middle English is a distinct variety of English influenced in large part by Anglo-Norman French. For example, Old English speakers do not distinguish between F and V. Just like speakers of modern German or E, speakers would use both sound F and V for letter F, ever, whose pronoun ever. But French speakers do distinguish these two sounds. Vous means you, and beau means crazy. After the conquest, English people had to distinguish between, for example, will and feel. So new sounds, new words, new syntax, all contribute to a significant change in the English language and to a new literature. The invention put French-speaking people at the highest level of society. Families that ruled England as a rule and held land in France. William the Conqueror was also Duke of Normandy, and the English king continued to hold the office and its lands until the 13th century. Only a handful of Anglo-Saxon families remained in any position of power. In England, French was the language of education and literature. It was not an obvious choice for Chaucer to write his Canterbury Tales in English. Consequently, the High Middle Ages in England were characterized culturally by their close relation to French and Italian arts. This will change the late 13th century as England and France come to loggerheads. In the 12th century, perhaps the most accomplished vernacular writer was an English woman named Mary de France. She wrote in Anglo-Norman. Mary was one of the main forces behind the stories of King Arthur and the Round Table. In France, Charlotte de Troyes was writing Arthurian romances for Mary of Champagne. The 13th century marks the flowering of Latin literature in England. The reign of King John is characterized in part by an increasingly deep cultural separation between France and England. Anti-papal attitudes, Oxford professor Robert Grosseteste called Pope Innocent IV the Antichrist, and a growing sense of nationalism helped to fill native literary tone. English literature comes into its own. Still, very little survives, and most of it is in Latin. This is the century of John Gore, Geoffrey Chaucer, and William Langland. We also have a number of surviving vernacular romances such as Sir Orfeo, as well as Sir Gawain and the Green Knight. The Battle of Bannockburn 1314 in defeat of the English by the British Scots is only one of many upheavals and revolutions during this tumultuous century. Other calamitous events include the Black Death or Plague in the middle of the century, the Pisan Revolt of 1381 and the Hundred Years' War. 1432 marks the death of Henry IV and subtle shift from medieval humanistic themes in literature. For our purposes, one of the interesting developments concerns the mystery plays. Mysteries were unions or guilds. These plays were performed in a number of towns and involved much of the working population. They retell the story of the Bible, sometimes humorously. Another remarkable literary phenomenon of the early 15th century is the Scottish interest in Chaucer. Like today's fan fiction, Scots authors copied Chaucer's style so well that for centuries some of their stories were thought to be Chaucer's own. That leads to the end of my presentation today. I want to say that studying history is fun and there is no harm in it because from history itself, there are answers that we may not know, and history also stores a lot of stories and relics that we can discuss and use as teaching materials to increase our knowledge. So if you really want to learn English history, you can start from Old English, the Middle English, and so on. No need to rush, learn slowly and understand every part of it. Then you will find the history is fun to discuss. That will be all my presentation today. Thank you for all your kind attention. Wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.